So I'd just like to start by thanking and greeting everyone in the room, peers, activists, people with a common interest. So just starting off, the title of my segment today is Be That Change. So I think it follows on very nicely from what Joanna has been talking about in the beginning of this morning. So I've done a lot of networking this year, and often the first question after introductions on what's your name is, what do you do? This is quite an interesting question for me because it's often genuinely coming from a place of curiosity, but sometimes it is actually coming from a place of why are you here and why are you speaking to me? So the answer to that question really is I'm an architect. Now, the definition of what an architect is something that is quite personal to me. I know there are different schools of thought on what architects are and what architects do, but just starting with what I do as a job. So currently and very, very recently, I've started working at a company called Catalyst. My actual job title is a senior technical advisor. So it's not typically the standard model of what architects do, but I make sure to always include the in brackets that I am an architect, just in case anybody was kind of confused as to why I'm there. The second thing that I also am actively, and I count as part of the work, is a member of the BFA network, so that stands for Black Females in Architecture. Going through my career and study, it was quite difficult because you are often the only person in the room of a certain category. And back in 2018, this network started on the spur of people coming into a room in a conference like this and actually finding someone, and there was that excitement. It's like, oh, we found a person, let's all come together. And now this network is hosting over 500 members globally, and I make sure that in that spirit, I'm always actively mentoring and engaging with the network as much as I have the capacity to do. The other thing and hat that I wear is I am actually a member of the National Council representing London on the RIBA. I got into this role really to be, again, a representative for people who might not necessarily have aspect and make sure that our professional institutions are being held accountable for that. So making sure that you get into those spaces which needs your input. And then lastly, I'm actually a founder. So I set up a year ago, it's actually just coming up to the 1-year anniversary, my own private practice because I consider myself a business. It's one of the things when you start architecture school, there's that aspiration of always wanting to be your own person. So great, that's kind of what I do as a job, but for me, what do I really do? That comes from a place of what are my origins? What is the very essence of who I am? So there's things that will probably be a prerequisite. In the context of today and being in the UK, I am considered a migrant, I'm an African. Nigerian is the country that I apparently come from. I'm ethnically Yoruba, female, and a millennial. So all of these things are kind of set by the context of how I arrived on this planet. And yeah, it's not something that would really change. But I would also like to add to that the idea of self-definition. So with all of those things, I also will consider myself, and this is something that I hold strongly, a global citizen, and recognize that all of these identities that are attached to me, I can also have an influence in defining that. And really, my work as an architect kind of sits in the background of the identity. So your job is something that you do, but who you are, and it needs to sit behind who you are. And when you're asked the question, the main thing is really the answer is the context. So why is the person asking you that, and what is the reason, and what are we actually there for? So why bother being engaged in the built environment? Well, as we all know, the built environment contributes up to 39% of global carbon emissions, which is changing literally the fabric of the planet that we live on. And that's even before you consider all of the social, psychological, physical impacts that it has on living So my career, I describe that more as a journey, and I look at that whole thing, the idea of career as a journey, which is marked by critical moments where you have to take stock of what's going on, but kind of hovering in the background is what's the purpose of even having a career? Why are you there? And for me, that's being an active agent in change. So I think the slides have gone a bit funny, but we'll leave it. Just work with me on this. And the L should be on the top. So before I move into a really short summary of my journey over the past few years, I just want to hold the thought that, what I want everyone to take away from this room is kind of the idea of defining your own personal capital and not having that being dictated to you, and also having an awareness of where you sit in the context and in those moments. Are you someone who's classed as a worker, or are you being a leader in that space? So critical moments. I'll start by the decision, the beginning. I decided to be an architect against the will of my parents. Luckily, I was already a spare child, so they'd already gotten 2 of each. So, this one, we don't need to be as hard on that. And also, they would never have gotten it anyway, because when I say I'm going to do something, it's quite hard to get me away from that. The first big critical moment was in 2012, being a migrant. There was a change to the immigration law in the country, so how I'd set up on the career of becoming an architect, and suddenly my entire roadmap and plan was now in jeopardy. And really, the next few years, the next 4 years, going through part 1, part 2, was kind of a period of just surviving everything, surviving being the training and surviving actually just getting your qualifications. The next big critical moment, which I believe is probably same for everyone in this room, was the global pandemic, where we were all forced to live in the spaces and the fabric that we had created as a society. And that really helped you to kind of refocus what you were doing in all those different spaces. I think that then the next critical moment, I would say, in my career was in 2023, when I collaborated with the Just Transition Lobby. This is a very loose collective of people actively trying to leverage our built environment institutions, and hence the kind of me getting into position as a council representative in London. And just linking 2020 to 2023, in that period, we had the election of the first worker president. Again, the same group of people were trying to create momentum of that. And I asked myself during that period, what am I actually doing to help the situation and to contribute? And then earlier this year, with the same cohort of probably people who you might sometimes call us insane, decided to run again. They got Muyiwa into the presidency, but this time we wanted to kind of keep hammering the point that we'd started off. And I was the lucky person and candidate in the group that got selected to run for the presidential campaign. That campaign was a fantastic experience for me, because I actually got to go outside away from my desk and speak to my peers and individuals in the built environment and kind of get a read of what everybody was thinking and how people felt, which I think is a really important thing to be able to get hold of if you're trying to be an activist, is knowing the spaces that you're moving through. And that kind of brings us to today, where I've started a new job and a new role, which is not non-standard. So when we think of the idea of campaigning, as I said, my campaign is for inclusivity and sustainability in the built environment, and really how I interpret that is being a representative for my peers. To be a representative as well, the other thing that's just kind of outside is that in terms of the work, is making sure I'm encouraging, facilitating, and supporting the things in my reach. So I've just, on the screen, you've got like kind of a few organizations that I'm involved with. There's many more, and I have to try and manage to not get burnt out, because I'm someone who gets quite excited and I want to do as much as I can, but you have physical limitations as a human being. And in all of these different organizations, they're kind of underpinning my personal campaign. So no matter what you're doing, you are probably campaigning in your own space. So I just put this image up to reflect on the biggest event, or is it really, was that losing the campaign. It was kind of a critical point where, how do I take this forward? And the image on the screen is an AI-generated rendering of and the prompt was "you lost," and for some reason it's come up with a building in a derelict state. I don't know why the AI is coming up with this when I hadn't put in anything about it being I lost an architectural campaign, but we'll just leave it there, just food for thought. So as alluded earlier in the previous talk, is that what do you do next when you get to a point where you could be considered a failure? Do you take a break? Or when you hit a wall, do you proceed? For me, that was to create, my decision at that point was to create examples in my spheres of influence. So I hadn't gotten that, but there were still many more things I could do. Underpinning all of that, I had to have a strategy of how I would actually achieve that. And for me, that's, and probably for many more people, that's actively being active in the communities that you have, acting decisively in the way you actually carry yourself through society. All of the things that you do is contributing to how you kind of move through that journey. And then also keeping the conversation, actively conversing with people so that you're not working in silos and you're getting your ideas and thoughts out. So going back to what I was already connected with, over the summer I've been more active in the BFA, even though in the image I'm kind of hiding at the back. I thought I was taller than I actually am. So I ended up there, and also I wasn't having a particularly good hair day, so I was kind of happy to be where I was, but then kind of you get in one of those moments like, but yeah, and they this network, as well as just being a community platform, they organize social initiatives, they collaborate with many businesses, again on the point of not just being a network that supports people in their career and being like a therapy session, but actually progressing into areas where they're influencing and impacting the built environment, obviously with the focus of the group of people that they represent. But when you come to talk about a point of inclusivity, generally if you have one group acting, the benefits are shared amongst other people. And then for me, I also wanted to look at what I could do outside the collaborative space, so like kind of making my own new initiative. And to do that, I looked at what other people were doing. So if you have your phones out, as mentioned, there's a QR code to this video by the Business Insider, where it talks about different entrepreneurs working in the global south and how they, from small ideas, have been able to impact their locale by actually tackling this issue of waste and recycling. So if you go later in the slides are there, I would definitely encourage people to look at that. And what was inspiring about this is these are ordinary people who are doing fantastic things without that much resource. So I had to go back to the whiteboard. Like, what are you really going to do, Funmbi? And more than 10 years ago, while I was still in my Part 1 course, I had an idea to have a studio for myself. Like I said, is what architects want to when you're in the traditional school, that's kind of the thoughts that are fed into you. So I actually decided to set up the LTD and brand it, and the OOA is actually just my initials, but I thought it was quite a nice thing to have like a studio. Wow, it's kind of like an expression of what you wanted to do, and you kind of take it away at that. So what am I doing in this studio? I've decided to go back to my community in Nigeria as one of my primary focuses. The slides have definitely gone on because there's a red mark on that, so you could actually know what I'm talking about. I'll point at the screen. I'm looking, so in Nigeria, I'm back in my hometown of Ibadan. There's a plot which sits behind this building over there in the center, which is a hotel. And it's basically a derelict site where the construction had started, but unfortunately had to stop. And the whole plot is overgrown. And what I'm doing with the client in this situation is trying to encourage them on how they repurpose and bring that piece of development back into use, but focusing on sustainability. So the things that we're trying to do is, and so that's kind of like an idea of, you get what you're dealing with. It's a very, very big plot of land, and the client has also turned it into a farm because they love farming. So while the building has been derelict, they've actually used it to changed all of that plot, which is not very typical in the psychology of people back home, into something productive. And the first few conversations with the client is like, can we use more sustainable bricks? Let's not always default to cement-based materials. And the thing that I was sent is like, we're going to use cement blocks, which are generally out of not really high quality and contributing to the problems. So I have my work cut out for me, but that's something I'm looking forward to engaging in the future. And yeah, really the challenge is just to try and change the main challenge is not the construction, it's changing the mindset that we can use traditional materials in a modern way, and our cultures don't need to harken back to this idea that using what's there is somehow linked to poverty. And then just to wrap everything up with what I'm doing in the UK context, so my company that I'm now joined, they managed to catch me even though I was resistant to go back into traditional practice. It's called Catalyst. It's a fairly large company, but they're Irish-based, so they're not in the UK. But the main thing about the business that attracted me to, collaborating with them is that they've got 3 sections. So they've got a technical advisory, a sustainable ESG, so a focus on sustainability and a focus on technology. And my job in there, being a building regulations principal designer, kind of sits in the technical advisory area, but it's kind of a key role in this change in industry where we really need to kind of get to grasp on how we do things. And yeah, like the reason why I joined them was because of their values. I think having a clear idea on who you collaborate with and give your time to is so important in how you act how you enact change as an activist and influence the people and peers. So when you have the choice, choose the right people to work with. And really, what is all of this for? Why do you even engage and go to work every day and try and make change in the built environment? For me, that's for the next generation, which will hold us accountable. I think everything we do, we must look and reposition ourselves in our daily lives. So that's a picture of my niece while I was trying to kind of draw plans for the project that was on the screen, and she decided that she could do it better. And so she grabbed the laptop, and I thought it was very cute because she's only about 10 months in that. And yeah, that's me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Am I on? Yes, I'm on. My head's kind of spinning. Like I was taking pictures of like you talking about the things you're involved in. And I was like, wow, that's a lot of things. And then there was another slide with more things. That's a lot of things as well. So what we are going to do is you can start asking or thinking about your questions for Funmbi. But wow, I mean, I know you, so I know that you were up to some of that, and obviously I'm very delighted that you're working with an Irish company because, all the best things.
I really think they're great people.
But you really did kind of give me a gift in listening to you because you talked very much about who you are and how you do what you do, not just the what you're doing. And that's exactly what we've sort of all been sort of reflecting on a lot. Like you've heard it a lot from all of the speakers this morning about the need to like feel it and understand what's going on and to be vulnerable, to make brave choices. And I think I was so grateful to you to be able to stand there and say, yeah, and then I stood for president and then I failed. And to stand here and say that and to think about like, okay, so I sat with that. And then I thought about moving forward from that. And it's so evident in your work, but you don't ever seem to question that as a practice and a behavior. Is that something that is just who you are as a person? Or is that something that you've been actually practicing and learning, like nature, nurture?
I think it's probably a mix of both because, like I said, I was despair, so there's kind of like I've always, and I think probably it was probably I was born like that to some extent. I was slightly stubborn, but then it's always been this kind of idea that you have to allow yourself to be able to fail, and who is holding me accountable? Ultimately, I believe that we are accountable to ourselves. That's not in the sense of being selfish. It's kind of when you do fail, that's nobody else's failure except yourself. So you have the opportunity to define the value of what that is. And so, I got into the campaign on the encouragement of others. I didn't necessarily say I want to be president of the RBA. I kind of did it because there was a request from the people around me and community, and I held myself accountable to those people. And, there was always a risk it wouldn't go well, but what do you do when things don't go well? Do you stop breathing? No, you carry on, and you have to keep doing that. And the purpose of why I did it hasn't changed, so why would I stop?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Why would you stop? There's a lot of questions coming in for you, and I think let's go to the top question. What was the hardest hurdle to overcome as a Black female rising to the top? Let's also just acknowledge There we go. Everybody thinks that you're right up there, rather than at the top, which I'd have to agree.
I'm not sure, but maybe it's because I was
It's
brought
the
with
how, but it's the how you do it. And I think that's what's most impactful. But yeah, what was the hardest hurdle?
I think the decision to get into the built environment was always mine. So that kind of underpins why I'm in those spaces. The hurdles I face is normally people's perception of who I am, the value of why I'm there. Am I just being a token? I know that, a lot of expense has been invested in me, and I hold that in the back of my head, that I need to actually make something out of all of the investment others have put into me. So the hurdle is normally just trying to get people to see you as a person and for what you are, not just your physical appearance, apparent age. I'm actually older than I look. Most of the time people get confused, and changing people's mindsets, but you kind of have to continue being resilient. So the way that is done is actually, again, going back to those communities, allowing yourself to be supported by others, and speaking and talking and being out there. If I stayed away from the limelight, then when I have the opportunity to do something on behalf of others, and I didn't really see that when I was growing up, then I failed another generation.
There's a lot of self-reflection in that practice, but there's also a lot of active engagement in that practice. And I know as the people who've been supporting you, and a lot of people who are in the Just Transition lobby are also in ACAN and the Architects Climate Action Network. And I think there's a lot about the behaviors of what, not so much what ACAN stands for, or what the Just Transition lobby stands for, it's the how, it's that self-reflection, it's that checking in with the people that you're working with. It's getting a steer, and it's doing that in a collective. I don't know that we've actually not mentioned the word collective much yet, but you are in all of these collective kind of environments, which I think is super important. I think there's a question from Douglas which says, your response to setback is inspiring. How were you supported by the communities you have developed? What lessons can you share? And I think this is really important. What lessons can you share for others in that position? Because I think you are allowing yourself to be vulnerable. You are making brave and bold decisions. You are accepting the failures as well as the successes. How are you held in that, and what can we take on as advice?
I think the good thing is that you have to be listening to what people are. You have to be an active listener. So wasn't on the slides in terms of active or actively doing things, but when you have a support network, try and listen to what everyone is saying and really interact with the feedback that you're getting, because your support network is your strength, and being disengaged from that and kind of isolating yourself, you won't get that far. So again, probably I'm less fazed by it because it wasn't something that I'd done in response to my inner motivation of wanting to become president. I'd done it as a service. I'd approached that campaign as I'm doing a service to the people because it matters. Yeah. It matters to them, it matters to me. So when you don't succeed, and I've had many times in my life when I've not succeeded, academically or whatever, in architecture school, that, sometimes there is that discrepancy in attainment. So it was just kind of another thing. But I think we should always be humble, like was mentioned, and try not to be too hard on yourself. You are a human being, not a machine. You might be trying to do a lot, but I think reflecting on that and remembering that you are a living, breathing, feeling person in everything that you're going through is something that can really help ground you in that.
Wonderful. We're almost out of time, but I'm going to ask one more question because I think it's a great one. It's from Robin, and it says, tell us more about that, the thing. Am I a worker or am I a leader? Would love to hear more of your thoughts about it. Can we be both? Is it good to sometimes just be a worker? Ooh, that last bit's really loaded as well. I'm loving this.
Absolutely. You kind of already answered the question. So what I was talking about is your career is a journey and you have critical moments, and it's kind of reflecting on what you are in that moment. Sometimes you are a worker, sometimes you're a leader, and sometimes you're both. So with the BFA, I'm not one of the founders. I am a worker there. They call me and I go if I have the capacity. With more of the initiatives that are self-led, I would say I'm leading in that perspective. And it's okay to be both. You don't need, there's no shame in being a worker, because at the end of the day, we're all trying to get at something. So that's something I hope everybody can at least, leaving this conference, feel empowered by.
And the good news is that Funmbi's going to be here all day, so if you want to have more of those questions, you are really welcome to do that. We're out of time for this session. Can you all just please, let's express our thanks to Funmbi. Thank you, Funmbi. Thank you so much.